great John Lott here today. Welcome, John Lott.
Great to talk to you again, Ann. Thanks for having me on.
For those of you who don't know, and I don't think I have any subscribers who don't know, John Lott first burst onto the scene for most of us when he wrote More Guns, Less Crime. Oh, I'm going to have you go through that story later. The NRA even opposed you. That's so hilarious. And you didn't care about guns. It was just this opening in economics. And now more gun myths. What is your latest book called? I'm sorry.
Gun control myths.
Yes. And there are a lot of them out there. But there was one thing in particular I wanted John to come on and talk about because, as he will explain, no one is covering this. And it's just this shocking attack on free speech from the Biden administration that we now know because Tulsi Gabbard declassified this shocking report. So could you talk about that, John?
Sure. Well, in June 2021, the Biden administration put out a report on domestic terrorism and what they were going to do about it. But that entire report that they made public dealt with criminal activities by so-called domestic terrorists. What Tulsi Gabbard declassified a couple weeks ago was the rest of the report. And to me, what really made it different than what was originally put out was they were talking about going after non-criminal activity, what they call concerning non-criminal activity. And so, over the last few years, there have been a number of whistleblowers or leaks that have come out in places like the FBI about how they've taken down license plate numbers from school board meetings or kind of infiltrated different Catholic groups or done a number of other things that are there but the administration would always come back and say, well, we're only dealing with criminals here. We're not trying to go after other types of people. Unfortunately, what the report makes clear, what the part that was declassified, was that, in fact, they were very concerned about non-criminal activity. So when, one of the leaks that came out was that during the Biden administration was that they were looking for symbols that people would have. Would you go and put 2A on your social media account? Or would you go and talk about the right to keep and bear arms? Or would you have a picture of the Betsy Ross flag there, the flag with the circle of stars from the Revolutionary War, as indications that the individual could be a domestic terrorist? Here, obviously they just wanted to go and identify people. I mean, just this week, we had Marco Rubio make a statement about how even in the State Department, they had a division there that was going and collecting social media posts from American citizens. I mean, why would the State Department be doing that? And there were real consequences. One of the things that the declassified document talks about is going after people for their financial accounts. So there was so-called debanking. So, we had a number of people not engaged in any criminal activity. For example, lawyers that work for Trump. I mean, you're a lawyer, obviously. People who are just giving legal advice. I mean, you can agree or disagree. I mean, obviously, any legal case that you have, you're going to have people on either side agreeing or disagreeing on who's right in terms of the law that's there. But, so you had people like John Eastman, who had his Bank of America account was canceled, no warning, just immediately canceled there, and he had no recourse. He had an account at USAA.
Can you explain, how does that happen? I mean, I know it happened to VDare too, the immigration website. They were thrown off PayPal and they're debanked in every possible way. And it just occurred to me listening to you talk about it. I mean, what happens? Do you get a notice from the bank? Do you have to go with a suitcase and pick up your money? How do you get your money? What does that mean to be debanked?
Well, that's exactly what happened. I mean, look, this is something that started in a sense under the Obama administration with his so-called Operation Choke Point, where the federal government would put pressure on financial institutions that dealt with companies that the Obama administration didn't like. Like if you were in the oil industry or you were in the firearms industry, they would go and essentially close down your accounts. Now, could companies still function without a banking relationship, without somebody to handle their checks or handle their credit cards for their customers, or even having a bank account to deposit things in? Yeah, you can function, but it's a lot more costly. For civilians, basically, you're forced to be on a cash basis. And there are a lot of things that you can't do on a purely cash basis these days. You know, try
Amazon.
buying something on the internet on a basic, cash basis.
Weren't there any banks who could resist that?
I know John Eastman tried multiple banks. Once you unfortunately, it's not just John. You had other lawyers. You had people who were supposedly debanked because of their religious or political views. The Biden administration was looking at whether people believed in the Latin Mass for Catholics or whatever. I mean, why? I mean, that's going pretty far afield in terms of, those would be the top people on my list for terrorist activity, the people that are very religious there. But are there ways you can exist? Yeah. I mean, people still live, but it makes their lives a lot more difficult.
How would an oil company deal with this?
You probably have to go and talk to an oil company, but I know, all I know is that there are workarounds that exist, but it raises their costs. And one of the reasons why they did this was to force some of them to go out of business, and some did. But so Trump, when he won during his first term, he immediately got rid of the Operation Choke Point. Biden reinstituted it, and apparently, according to these documents, made it much broader than just going after companies. We're also including individuals in this.
In response to this, have we found any like random individuals who had, I don't know, the Gadsden flag on their social media who had action taken against them? You'd think maybe they'd step forward now, or maybe they're all banned from social media.
Well, I mean, when the leaks came out during the Biden administration, when they were talking about looking for this symbolism as a proxy for whether somebody was a domestic terrorist, the agents themselves said that there had been people that had been identified, at least initially. It wasn't the final dispositive thing for whether or not they would be classified as terrorists or not. But, I don't know if I ever had a list. I was talking to John Eastman recently, and he was saying that based on these new declassified documents, he was going to file some Freedom of Information Act requests to go and find out exactly what the trail was with regard to him.
It's really shocking. I saw your tweet on it, your article in, I guess, Real Clear Politics. But you say that even the conservative media, obviously the mainstream media has not breathed a word of this, but even the conservative media isn't really picking up on this. And it is one of the most shocking things about that the Biden administration did. I mean, the border and this.
Right. Well, no, I mean, I agree with you. Look, I mean, you had places like the Washington Examiner and the Daily Caller had stories on it, and maybe it's just they get overloaded with so many different things. But to me, as I say, the most important thing is the fact that they expanded it to not just criminal activity, but for non-criminal activity. I mean, that's, the document that was declassified will talk about things like supporting freedom of expression. But they also have they say that twice, but many more times they talk about combating disinformation. It kind of reminded me when J.D. Vance was giving his talk a little while ago in Germany, and you had all these politicians in Europe going and saying, you have to have censorship in order to protect free speech and in order to protect democracy. It's kind of almost word for word. It seemed like what we were hearing from those European leaders that were there. And, they were talking about this document talked about the U.S. taking the lead in terms of combating disinformation around the world. They were talking about working with in the framework of this Christchurch Accord after the mosque shooting that had occurred there. And, you go and read through this stuff. They talk about going after hate speech, which included things at the time like going and identifying that mass murderer as a socialist. I don't know, maybe that's considered hate speech or not. I mean, obviously, all the documents there were trying to paint him as some right winger, but maybe you have a broader group of right wing friends than I do, but I don't know any right wing friends of mine who kind of consider China's communist government as being the ideal form of government to go and have, or to go and have rules that limit how many kids that people can have because having kids is destroying the environment. Or, I mean, maybe, I don't know, I have a very isolated group of people that I talk to.
Now, didn't you say that anyone who posted on social media what you just said, identifying the shooter as a socialist and save the earth, depopulate the earth, that was also a sign of domestic terrorism?
Well, it was a sign of hate speech, and it was something that they were, put pressure on social media companies in order. I mean, I had my accounts frozen when I put that out. Wrote about that in the New York Daily News. The irony is, I wrote about it in the New York Daily News, and then I tweeted it out in another account that I had from the Crime Prevention Research Center, and then they froze that one because I was citing the New York Daily News article that was there. But
Wow.
I mean, the New York Daily News is
liberal.
hardly, it's hardly a right wing publication that's there. So, but anyway,
Throughout 2016, the Daily News was even more obnoxious about Donald Trump than the HuffPo was. There were just endless front pages with Trump dressed up as a clown. So yeah, this isn't. This wasn't in human events. Why do you think this isn't getting more attention from the conservative media?
I don't know. I mean, I've talked to reporters at Fox. I tried to get them to go and do something. I know the reporters seem interested, but I don't know whether the editors just weren't interested in doing the story. I mean, I don't think they've covered it at all, let alone the part that I think is particularly important there. I don't know whether it's just that there's so much overload in terms of news stories occurring. I think this is extremely important. I mean, if you're going to stop these types of things from happening in the future, people have to know that this was something that was actually happening. And it seems to just have gone down a memory hole. But nobody needs to. I mean, I assume you've read the original document now that she declassified, and people can go to our website at crimeresearch.org, and we have the op-ed that I put up with links to the document so people can go and check it out themselves. Nobody needs to take my word for this, but you probably have a
funny.
better.
I just realized I assume only the conservative media would be interested in a shocking attack on free speech. But there
Right.
are some liberals. They tend to be the older ones.
Well, they're also switching party allegiances. Some of those old time
Yeah.
liberals, that a lot of them voted for Trump this last election. If you told them 8 years ago that they'd be voting for Trump, I don't think they would have believed you. But I'd like to think that 20 years ago, Democrats would have been outraged by a lot of this censorship too, but obviously not anymore. I mean, winning seems to be more important, and it's not only do they have all these federal government agencies from Department of Homeland Security to USAID to Department of Justice, the FBI, the State Department, all of them are listed in this document as working on this. I mean, it's really an amazing collection.
Mhm.
I mean, it's like the whole federal government was involved. But you have a situation here where again, if people don't know about it, it's not gonna keep it from happening again. I worry that it's something that could start again.
Yes, they are really enthusiastic censors. Um, is there anything else I wanted to ask you about that before we get to guns? Sort of makes you think differently about Edward Snowden now, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, there- yeah, there's issues about whether he went through the proper process to go and put out that information. My guess is if he had gone through the proper process, he probably would have gotten squashed in
Yes.
terms of putting that stuff out. So maybe it was the right decision to make. Uh, but obviously, the government classifies a lot of things that shouldn't be classified, and they
Every
also have things that are embarrassing that they shouldn't have done to begin with. That it's useful for voters to know about. I mean, I have to say one of the amazing things about this term for Trump is the number of things that they've declassified and put out there for people. I think Tulsi Gabbard's done an amazing job in terms of declassifying things, and this is, I'm just glad she's there because otherwise, none of this would have come to light.
over. Um, Incidentally, I love Trump's cabinet, and I disagree with you on Mike Waltz. I saw your tweet today. I
Okay.
think he was a
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just
ridiculous.
go and listen to JD Vance on something like that. I don't know. It could be fallout from the signal thing, could be something else that's there, but
I think it's
he's
because he's a neocon. I mean, he in that signal conversation, Vance was about the only one who doesn't want
right.
to war with the world, and it was Waltz who was pushing it. And I think, and he put Goldberg of the Atlantic, Jeff Goldberg, total Trump hater. I think he made up. I mean, I can't prove it, but I don't believe Trump called our troops suckers and losers. I mean, just look at the man's entire
Oh
life.
yeah, no, I agree with you.
And
But
that's
look,
Jeffrey Goldberg, and he's on the Signal chat. I don't think he should have gone to the UN even, though I do like him going to the UN to help establish that the UN is just an utterly ridiculous organization. And whether it's that Stefanik or this washout from the Trump administration, we don't really care what the UN is doing.
well, my guess is for a lot of people, the UN is a more prestigious position. I mean, if you're going to go and ask the common person who's been the UN ambassador or who's been the national security advisor, yeah, my guess is you're probably going to have more people who know who the UN ambassador is. And if somebody wants to run for office again, if Waltz wants to go and get back into politics, having been the UN ambassador probably is a more high profile position that would allow him and help him do that again in the future. So
More
I don't
people
know.
know who Kim Kardashian is.
Well, okay.
That's not helping her. Okay, let's
I'm
get
just,
to your latest gun study, which was no one has ever done this before. Very interesting. I'm not at all surprised. But anyway, the one about civilians versus police officers.
right. So the FBI collects data on what they call active shooting attacks. These are shootings that occur in public, not involving some other type of crime like a gang fight over drug turf. Anything from one person being shot at and missed all the way up to a mass public shooting. And we looked at the data over the last decade, and we wanted to look at to see how police are doing. Now, one thing that people need to appreciate is what an incredibly difficult job a uniformed police officer has. You have somebody in uniform. These attackers have real tactical advantages over that officer. They can, if I have one officer there and I'm an attacker, I can wait for the officer to leave the area before I attack, or I can move on to another target and attack that. Or if I'm going to right, or I'm going to shoot the officer. So, I mean, since you mentioned that, I'll just mention this. One of our results was that police who stop these attacks are almost 7 times more likely to end up being killed by the attacker than civilians are, which is just like, and they're much more likely to be wounded. So, we should be thankful that these guys are putting their lives on the line and doing this incredibly difficult job in uniform. I mean, one way to think about this that I ask people is we have air marshals on planes. Who thinks that air marshals ought to be in uniform? I don't know anybody who thinks air marshals ought to be in uniform. And why not? Because if you have an air marshal in uniform, happens to be a terrorist there, who do you think the terrorist is going to take out first? It's kind of like having the air marshal have a neon sign that is above him says, "Kill me first."
Well,
And the same thing is true with the police officers. So what we find is that civilians are more likely to stop these types of active shooting attacks than police are, and they're less likely to get harmed when they're trying to stop these attacks. Now, there are multiple reasons why these civilians may be more likely to stop these attacks. I mean, one is we just mentioned they're not in uniform. I would like to have compared non-uniform police to uniform police, but we only have 2 cases over the last decade where a non-uniform police officer was involved in trying to stop these attacks. So it's not really enough data for us to really do anything with. But you have these civilians stop these at a higher rate, in part because they're not in uniform, so the attackers don't know if somebody's there, but also because we have a lot more civilians carrying guns. We have
those were amazing statistics. I wanted you to run through. I was surprised. I mean, a lot of people get their concealed carry license, but they're not always carrying. Give the figures on that. I'm really impressed with Americans for being so well armed.
Right. Well, I mean, you have about 21.5 million Americans with a concealed carry permit, but then now we also have 29 constitutional carry states where it's not even necessary for people to get a permit to be able to go and carry. And, that's about half the population in the United States is covered, and it's like over 60% of the area of the country is covered with that. And we've done some surveys on that. And what you find is if you look at likely voters, slightly over 7% of likely voters say that they carry all the time, and another 8% say that they carry some of the time. So you're talking about 15% of the adult population in the United States. You compare that to police. We have about 670,000 full-time active law enforcement in the United States. Maybe a third are on duty at any point in time. So you have 220,000 or so that are on duty. 220,000 people to protect 340 million. That's a big job to be able to go and do that. So it's not too surprising that the police are less likely just to be around. And because of the fact that they're in uniform, these killers, these attackers, either wait for them to leave or move on to another target. One of the things I've often disagreed with a number of conservatives about is they go and talk about having school resource officers.
I was just going to bring that up. Another way the NRA has been idiotic. Also, NRA to Gun Owners of America. Man, that drove me crazy when that was their big eye. I think it was after Newtown, and at least some of the hosts from Fox News brought it up. And how can anyone who is smart enough to remember to eat and go to the bathroom during the day think that's going to be a good idea? And yet it's NRA and it's primetime hosts on Fox. Oh, we need armed guards. Brilliant.
Well, Isa Hutchinson headed up the report that the NRA did. I tried having some input with him, but got no place on that. And, if you're going to have a police officer at a school, I beg you, have him blend in, make him the PE coach, make him a staff person there. Don't have them in uniform, and rather than having a sign in front of the school that says this is a gun-free zone, have a sign in front of the school that says warning, select teachers and staff at this school are armed and carrying concealed, and will use it to protect people. We have over 10,000 schools in the United States that have armed teachers and staff. Uh, if you look at all the school shootings in the United States, and we've looked at everything from an accidental discharge where nobody was shot all the way up to a mass public shooting, there has not been a single attack at a school that has armed teachers and staff anywhere near during school hours. You can find a couple like at 2 a.m. in the morning with two gangs fighting against each other in school parking lots. But there's not been a single attack where anybody's been wounded or killed at any of those schools. All the school shootings, all the attacks where anybody's been hurt have occurred at places where guns are banned, or you have these uniformed school resource officers that are there.
Oh, so that actually has happened with the uniform school resource. There actually have been school shootings.
Yeah, I mean, even going back to Columbine. At Columbine, they had a uniformed school resource officer that was there. At Columbine, the irony is that the reason why he was stationed at a school was that he had so failed his firearms test. He was not able to hit a target 25 feet away. And so they put him at a school. Now, given all that, he still saved a number of lives because he basically exchanged gunshots with the two killers there and delayed them for a few minutes. They had these hand grenades that they had made that they were throwing down the hall, and it made it impossible for him to maintain his position. He basically ran away at that point. But giving people in the library time to go and escape. So one thing, just since this is a bit of trivia on my part, that with regard to the Columbine shooting that almost nobody knows about, and that is even the New York Times had a front page story mentioning that Dylan Klebold had been virulently against the concealed carry bill that was before the state legislature at the time there. And that concealed carry bill would have allowed teachers and staff who had a concealed carry permit to carry on school property. I talked to Doug Dean. Doug Dean, I actually was in Denver, Colorado the morning of the Columbine attack.
Yeah.
I had been there to go and talk to the state legislators because it's possible this is a coincidence, but the attack occurred on the same day that final passage of the concealed carry law was planned to be voted on in the state legislature. The vote was scheduled for about 2 hours after when the attack occurred.
Wow.
And Doug Dean told me, he was the majority leader at the time in the state house. He told me that the state representative for that area had gotten letters from Dylan Klebold lobbying against the concealed carry bill that was before the state legislature at that time.
Wow.
So,
that is not well known. That's a showstopper.
So anyway, one thing I'll say, and this is probably one of my biggest pet peeves in the gun control debate, is that time after time, these mass murderers will explain why they picked the targets that they did. And, whether it be like the Nashville school shooter or the Buffalo grocery store shooter or others, well, in their diaries and manifestos will go into great detail about why they picked the target that they did. And I want somebody to explain to me why that isn't newsworthy, why the media just refuses. So even in the Covenant school shooting case, the Nashville police chief, the day of the attack, in his press briefing, explained that he had looked at the diary before it was turned over to the FBI and went into a black hole that was there for a long time. He said he had looked at it and that the murderer there, she had originally planned on going after the Greenfield Mall, but had decided not to because there are people with guns. there. They allowed concealed carry at the mall. And so she had picked the school. And
Now,
but you will look in vain, even though that was part of his press conference, you will look in vain for any media coverage afterwards that will go and mention that fact. And on our website at crimeresearch.org, we've collected literally dozens of statements from these mass murderers over the years where they say the same thing over and over again. Look, these guys may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid. Their goal is to get media coverage. You know, we have people that want to commit suicide. At some point along the line, people who feel unappreciated knows that they could commit suicide and people would know who they were, that they were here. You know, they'd get their names in the history book. You see statements time after time. I force myself to read these diaries, manifestos, where they will say, if I can only kill more people than such and such did, I can get even more media attention. And so these guys know the more people they kill, the more media attention they're going to get. And they know if they go to a place where their victims aren't able to go and defend themselves, they're going to be able to go and kill more people. You have somebody like the Sandy Hook killer, where police described what he did was essentially the equivalent of a doctoral dissertation. He'd spent 2.5 years planning his attack. And according to one police report, he had graphed out the relationship between the number of people killed in mass public shootings over the previous 40 years and the amount of media coverage that they had gotten in order to prove to himself that the more people that he could kill, the more media coverage that he would get. And his goal was to kill more people than the Norway killer had killed. The Norway killer, if you ignore the bombing deaths, had shot to death 67 people, which is more than any mass public shooting that we've had in the United States, because he wanted to get more media coverage worldwide. I can't prove this last part, but I wouldn't be surprised if the reason why he picked going after the elementary school was the shock value of going and killing little kids and thinking that would also help him get even more media coverage. But that's just speculation on my part, having read a number of these killers' diaries and manifestos.
No, and the media's only tribute to this fact that they're doing it for fame and a longer Wikipedia entry is to not mention the guy's name. Oh, that's going to do something.
Right. Well, some of these guys will say, even if the media won't mention my name, I know my name will be in the history books. And so that, you know, but obviously a lot of the media doesn't. Look, I'm not advocating getting rid of the First Amendment. Okay. I'm not even sure how you'd write it or be able to go and enforce that. I mean, obviously you have places like Canada, which bars you from mentioning the name of criminals in media reports or people accused of crimes.
It does?
Yeah, up until the trial is done, yeah.
You can't mention the suspect's name?
That's my understanding, yeah.
Is that to protect Muslims?
That's been around for a long time. I don't think it's something.
Why on earth would that be? It drives me crazy with our media and even the British media. Why can't I immediately get the name and the photo of the suspect? Okay, if he's proven.
I assume, I mean, the best argument I can make for it is to try to assure a fair trial for the individual. But, you know, there are lots of pretty heinous crimes that you'd like to have people know about and stuff.
Yeah, there are plenty of safeguards in the trial. Anyway, I'm very opposed to that policy.
Yeah, well, I can understand that. I wasn't bringing it up as a favorable thing, but the
I'm not sure if I even want to waste our time on this, but I know you drive the left absolutely crazy. And they used to do this with me, not as much as they do it with you, but they just go around saying, no, his facts are wrong, or facts are wrong, make stuff up, facts are wrong. I mean, obviously everything you've said is very, very well documented. People can look it up and they wouldn't keep burying it if it were just a mistake. But have they come up with any new tricks, or is that what they're sticking with?
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is all the studies that we put out, all the research, we put the data there for people to be able to go and check. You know, the thing that we're talking about, the active shooting cases, there are links to the FBI data. We've gone and documented all the cases where civilians have stopped these attacks. There's links to the underlying news stories that are there. Now, one thing I will say is that the FBI data relies on newspaper reports. And the problem with that, I think, is that, and we're showing that in some updated research that we've been doing, that the media is more likely to cover attacks that the police stop than they are civilians. So, for example, if civilian stops the attack, well, first of all, let me just back up. Whether it gets the amount of coverage it gets and how detailed the coverage is going to be related to the number of people who are killed. And if civilians are there quickly and being able to go and stop the attack early,
not as many people
that will reduce the amount of coverage. But even after you account for the number of people who are killed, you still find a difference in news coverage between civilians and police stopping these attacks. Even when you account for that and account for things like whether the attack occurred in the school or other things that could affect the newsworthiness. And so, for example, do they even mention what gun was used by the attacker? With the police, they basically always mention it. With civilians stopping it, they don't always mention it. Do they mention the age of the attacker? All the police stories mention the age of the attacker. There's about 38% or so of the attacks involving civilians stopping these attacks where they won't mention it. And so it's just the amount of coverage, how they cover it. And so when we're looking at things like the gap between, how frequently civilians stop these attacks and police, we're probably underestimating the benefits from civilians doing it.
Yeah,
we're
you
probably
had some
also
figures on that. What the FBI said versus what you guys found.
Right. Well, so when I worked in the Department of Justice in 2020, one of my jobs was to go and look through the active shooting reports that the FBI had done. And one of the things that kind of I was surprised by was just they themselves tended to miss cases where civilians stopped these attacks. So if you look at the last decade, the FBI claims that about 14 of 302 active shooting cases were stopped by civilians. I think the number is actually about 180 cases that are there. Nobody needs to take my word for it. As I say, on our website, we have all the cases. We have links to the underlying stories. Now, is it possible that the FBI they hired these researchers at Texas State University to go and do news searches on this stuff? Is it possible they're just sloppy? To miss that many cases and to miss particularly just that type of case stretches credulity to some extent. But the thing that really bothers me is that even when you point them out to them, and even when I could get the FBI to admit that they had missed something, years later, they still haven't fixed them. And
like the New York Times, you can send in correction after correction and you won't fix it.
I still, just as a way of kind of dealing with anger issues, I guess I write letters to the editor for the New York Times, but I've long gotten past any notion that they're going to actually publish them.
But they never put the correction in, right?
Yeah, no, I know.
At Human Village, they had a long list of, we were interested in Joe McCarthy, whom I wrote about, and it was just lie after lie after lie, provable lie, and they'd send the letters in, and New York Times doesn't issue the correction, and they sure don't print the letters.
Right. So who knows? You can try. I had an op-ed in the New York Times in 2018, I should mention, the errors in the NICS background check system. And I almost got the op-ed.
What's the NICS background? Is that
That's for when you buy a gun, when they do the background check to see whether you're a prohibited person or not.
What is
so
we'll frequently hear
that there are 4 million dangerous or prohibited people that have been stopped from buying guns because of background checks. And that's simply false. What they should say is that there have been 4 million initial denials, and something over 99% of those are mistakes. You think when you buy a gun, you fill out the 4473 form that you give your name, your address, your birthday, your race, your eye color, your sex, your social security number. You think they're using all that information, and what they basically use for virtually all the checks are roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays. And, if you go to a businessman and suggest that that's how they do background checks on employees, they will look at you like you're from Mars on it. And if private companies had an error rate that was 100th the error rate that the government has, they'd be sued out of existence under federal law. And so anyway, after God knows how many months of fact checking, the New York Times finally ran the op-ed piece that I had there. I was told by the op-ed editor they'd gotten 75,000 angry emails within 24 hours. And in fact, if you look, the op-ed editor, 2 days after my piece ran, had an open letter to the New York Times family email that he sent out where he was explaining that every once in a while they thought it would be useful to have a piece on the other side of the debate on different issues. And my understanding, he almost got fired. A couple years later, 2 years later, when he ran Tom Cotton's piece, the same.
I was going to ask if this was James Bennett.
Yeah, right.
So the one fair op-ed editor they ever had was cashiered pretty soon after. You know what would have been fun? If only they had been able to do this. It would have been great if they had just turned the letters over to you.
Yeah, well, that would be fun. I would have. They had a couple letters in that they published responding to me from Congress people. And the funny thing was, I mean, it's just a joke. This one woman, Congresswoman, was saying that the problem was they just didn't have enough money to go and enforce the law there. That's the reason why. Because like, you take any year, you may have like 250,000 denials, and they'll have like 24 cases that they bring and maybe get 12 convictions. And the typical thing when you have a Democratic president, the Republicans will attack them for not enforcing the gun control laws. And this is Exhibit A. When you have a Republican president, Democrats will attack them. The thing is, these just aren't real cases. And the thing is, as a lawyer, I'm sure you understand, these are like the most trivially easy cases to win. I mean, you have somebody who signed a form saying that I'm not a felon. I guess he could argue that he forgot he was in prison for 5 years or something like that. But that's not going to be much of a defense. You have them sign a form. Their ID was checked, so you know that it's that guy who signed the form. And in almost all the cases, you're going to get it on video also that he was trying to go and buy the gun. And so, what's the case going to be over the court's going to hear? As I say, simply forgetting you were a felon's not a defense that's going to be useful. And so, these are, if they were real cases, you wouldn't even have to spend much resources in order to get convictions on them. And so anyway, but that was about the best response that they could make. They just, we just need more money to go and enforce them. I'll mention one other thing. When Jeff Sessions became the Attorney General, one of his top priorities, because he had been one of the ones who had attacked Democratic presidents for not enforcing these laws, was to go and make sure that they prosecuted all of these denials that were there. The rate of bringing cases and the convictions didn't change. It was still just a tiny fraction of 1% of the cases. So, maybe it was just rhetoric on his part from talking to people that were working with him. He seemed to be convinced, at least before he got into office, that he was going to make a difference there. But anyway.
Oh,
So,
it's the proof. Okay, I've two more questions for you. One is, as I alluded to earlier, I mean, I've always loved the NRA, mostly because they are absolutely single issue voters, as my brother is. They will endorse any incumbent who votes right on guns, and it doesn't matter if the person is a socialist, pro abortion, whatever. If they vote right on guns, you got the NRA's endorsement, and I wish immigration groups would do the same thing. In any event, when they came out with that uniformed guard after the Sandy Hook shooting, I had to roll my eyes at that. And I know my impression is that the gunners have always kind of thought of gun owners of America as a little more hardcore. So I'm going to ask you about that, but also connected to the second mark against the NRA is that they opposed you when you came out with your study on more guns, less crime. So answer about gun owners and then what the NRA did with you on more guns, less crime.
right. Well, I had an op-ed in the New York Times in 1998 that dealt with gun-free zones and schools. And I have to say, if you had told me a few years before I'd done this, I'd be writing an op-ed like that, I probably would have been on the other side of it too. But, it was becoming pretty obvious to me even back then that these murderers were picking targets that they thought were defenseless, that they could go and do. And so at the time, about the only people that were on my side for making that argument. I mean, I can't even describe to you the amount of hate mail and stuff that I got for doing that. But even, as you say, even the NRA came out against me, just saying that that was a wacky idea to have armed teachers and staff, that you need to have, police officers doing it at the time. And, so I don't know. I mean,
It's amazing how much you've changed the world. I mean, people don't realize it. Everyone listening right now hears that and says, that's crazy, obvious. Well, it wasn't obvious, and you were just looking at this hole in economic research. And really, in short order, it seems to me, after More Guns, Less Crime came out, you just had state after state passing concealed carry and more and more statistics coming out. It's hard to think of someone else who has changed the world and for the better as much as you have on guns and made Americans safer.
Who knows what impact anybody has on these debates?
Reflect back on what people were saying back then. You don't have to admit to it. I'll just make it as a statement.
Right. I mean, what I will say is, particularly on the gun-free zone stuff, I think I maybe had a clear impact. But look, I mean, it basically destroyed my academic career. I was at the University of Chicago when the stuff came out. I had Mayor Daley call up the president of the University of Chicago in November '98. My book came out in May. And basically, he spent 45 minutes talking to Hugo Sonnenschein, the president, where he went through all the wonderful things the city wanted to go and do with the university. And then at the end of the call, he said that Lott's continued presence at the university was going to do, quote, irreparable harm to the relationship between the city and the school. And
man, they'd like to shut down today.
I mean, if I had been on the left and a politician had called up and done that, my guess is they would have told him to go jump in the lake someplace. And then after Chicago, I ended up going to Yale Law School in the second year that I was there. I mean, look, had I done a number of things that people would think were fairly conservative type things that would get people upset, I mean, yeah, but I'd always had enough publications to go and protect myself. So there was a ranking that came out of economists worldwide for publications from 1969 through 2000. I didn't start publishing until the late 1980s after I got my PhD. I was ranked fourth in the world in terms of pages published in peer-reviewed economics journals.
Wow.
And even though I was only publishing for like half that period of time that was there, and that, it's the reason why I could bounce around between different universities, like the Wharton Business School, Stanford, University of Chicago, and then Yale. But then when I was at Yale, the second year I was there, I was asked to go and testify on legislation that they had to make the registration and licensing laws even more stringent in Hawaii. And before I went there, I told the legislators who were inviting me, I only testify when I'm invited by legislators, that I knew the Honolulu police chief was going to be testifying on the other side. And I said, you need to ask him in advance 2 questions because you want him to be able to answer them. You don't want him to feel sandbagged or anything. I want to know how many crimes had Hawaii been able to solve since 1960 when they started registration and licensing as a result of the program, and how much it cost each year in order to run the program. I knew the answer for the first question, which was 0, which is what he said. And the answer to the second question was he didn't have a dollar amount, but he said it took about 50,000 hours of police time each year to go and run the registration licensing program. And you could feel the air go out of the room when he answered that. If he could point to 1,000 cases that they had solved, there'd be some trade-off. He could point to 100 or 12 or 3 or 1. At least there'd be some discussion of trade-offs there. 50,000 hours worth of police time each year. There's a lot of crimes that you could have prevented or solved as a result of having police do things that we know work there. So anyway, I go back to Yale, and a couple of days after I get back, Susan Rose Ackerman, the associate dean there in the law school, calls me in and basically says that they had gotten complaints from Hawaii's 2 U.S. senators about me and about the fact that I had killed this legislation that they thought was important to get passed. And Susan informed me that I was not going to be welcome around the law school after the end of that year. And and at that point,
you've given up a lot. You've saved tens of thousands of lives. You have provably saved tens of thousands of American lives. And you also have a very impressive list of enemies.
Yeah, well, who knows? But anyway, at that point, the word had pretty much gotten out in academia that politicians would go and complain to the universities, and nobody wanted to have that. And so I couldn't get a job anyplace. I was basically unemployed for like 7 months. Ended up at the American Enterprise Institute, and even there, I ran into problems because apparently George Soros's Open Society program and others had gotten the names of donors for AEI. I'm not supposed to talk about this, I guess, but would go and harass them. And so Chris DeBooth would go and tell me that he would have like 45 minutes to go and talk to some big donor and have to spend the first 15, 20, 25 minutes talking about this Lott guy who they were getting all these emails and telephone calls about. And then at the end of the time, the guy would say, I'm just not going to give money this year. Now, was it because the guy was interested in foreign policy and they just didn't have time to go and talk about it? Or whether it was because of the fact that, the guy just didn't want to get harassed anymore by that, he couldn't tell. But it was obviously a cost that was a risk that they were taking at AEI there. And so I ended up leaving.
So besides saving tens of thousands of American lives, this may be the most impressive thing I know about you. It was harder for AEI to employ you than to employ Charles Murray. Now that's impressive. Okay, I'm gonna let
Charles
you go.
Charles is a hero of mine. So
But you've saved more lives. He's
well, I
probably
don't know about
saved
that,
more
but
livelihoods. Um, and we'll see now that disparate impact is over. I want to thank you so much for coming on again, and everyone should go. Why do I always forget? Crime Research.
.org, crimeresearch.org.
Oh, that's easy. That's why I can't remember. I always think there's a third word. Okay, crimeresearch.org. It has all kinds of great stuff that we couldn't even get to, but I will periodically have John Lott on again if you'll agree, because he is a font of information and a huge American hero. Thank you, John Lott.
Well, thank you for being there, Ann. And I have to say, you going to college campuses and trying to get women upset with me about giving women the right to vote. I'm sure they're. But anyway.
Time, John.
All right. All right. Well,